Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third GRAM webinar. Our previous two webinars took time to discuss education needs within the industry, to discuss sustainability and the training of people coming into the marketplace and how we educate the people within it. Secondarily, we looked at operators and how they're having to deal with the real day-to-day requirements of working in today's fast-moving and very difficult to operate in marketplace. Now, thirdly, we have a very esteemed panel joining me here today, which I'd like to introduce you to in a moment, but we'll be discussing what is our sustainable future we're looking at, what's in store for the sustainable kitchens and the future of our industry and how we're going to interact with it moving forward. My name is Glenn Roberts, and I'm the Managing Director for GRAM here in the UK and Ireland. If I could take some time just to introduce three panellists here today who we're delighted to say have joined us today. On my left here is Peter Ducker, who is the Chief Executive at the Institute of Hospitality. It's the leading association that has over 6,500 professional members within the hospitality industry. So thank you very much, Peter, for being part of this today. If I move along to Andrew Etherington, who is the chairman of the FCSI in the UK and Ireland. That also is the largest association of food service consultants, both management and design, who are looking at developing and designing and building the facilities of the future. And finally, if I can introduce Keith Warren here, who is the director of CISA, the Catering Equipment Suppliers Association, who represents over 170 manufacturers who are either manufacturing here in the UK or importing products into the UK to then be sold. Of course, we'd be delighted if you could help participate in our discussions today, and you can do that in a couple of ways through our Twitter feed. We're at GramUKGreen, hashtag the Go Green Debate, and questions at thegogreendebate.co.uk. So please join us if you can and put your questions in, and we'll do our best to answer them as we go through the various topics we're going to raise now. But to get started, it's, we were talking about this earlier, in fact, is where do we start from and what is sustainability? Quite a lot of the terminology that's used in this area is quite nebulous and hard to define. So it's a loose term that can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So, gentlemen, how do you think it can be defined and dealt with in our industry? Peter, if I could ask you that first.
Well, yeah, I think that sustainability it's part of good corporate citizenship. And I think people are now seeing it as a very joined up thing of how do you make your business, or your organisation, fit for the future so that it continues. But how do you sustain it in all ways, in terms of staff retention, client retention, shareholder satisfaction, because they believe they're investing in a company that's ethical and good. So I think it's gone on from being just about switching off lights to being a much more holistic approach.
And you're seeing that as a challenge that your members face on a day-to-day basis, how it's reflecting through them.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's one of those things where if you go back 20 or 30 years, it was all about health and safety, or it was about 10 years ago it was about e-commerce. And I think the corporate agenda is now about being good corporate citizenships, and it's kind of hardwired into companies' DNAs.
That's fascinating.
That's what's happening.
Thank you. Yes, that's interesting. What do you think, Andrew, and your work with the consultants and obviously your clients, and how they're approaching sustainability, and how do they tend to define it?
Very much the same way as Peter is saying. I think the days of greenwash have gone. It is now very much an intrinsic part of most organisations, and I think people are increasingly understanding what sustainability, what they believe sustainability means. Believe you me, if you Google the word, you get 101 different agendas coming up. But I think it is about building. From the equipment point of view, building the right equipment that is robust, that does the job it's supposed to do, using the least amount of energy, or using the energy in the most efficient way, but then looking at the whole life of the equipment. So you're looking at the end, is that equipment then, can it be disposed of in a way that future generations, we're all fathers, we all have children. What are we doing for the world in the future? And I think the whole CSR debate is recognising that we are looking at the whole life now.
And it must be particularly relevant for some of your members who are designing and creating buildings and shopping venues, etc., or hotel complexes. They're going to be there for 15, 25, 50 years.
Exactly.
So for the long term. It's
yes.
critical.
It is very, very much so, and it isn't just for today. There is still that debate, and I'm sure we'll come on to it later, about the capital against the revenue cost and so on and so forth. But I think there is a greater understanding now of the need. If you build something in the right way, and again, BIM, something else to touch upon. If you build something in the right way with the right equipment, it will deliver in the long term.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We will touch upon that
Yeah.
in a little while as well. And now to you, Keith, as well. And of course, you're representing the people who make the boxes, and of course, increasingly complex and clever boxes, and coming into the marketplace to a whole manner of things. How do you think this sustainability issue can be defined in our part of the marketplace?
I think taking it back to the definition of the word sustainability, which is conserving the ecological resources of the planet, and then where do we fit within that as the equipment community?
Yes.
I think it's principally about energy, water and waste in the in-use phase.
Yes.
I think for manufacturers, certainly they've become very effective in decoupling any environmental pollution from the economic growth that we've seen, and we've seen significant innovation come through in order to address those needs and those issues. So I think certainly it's that broad sense, and we see certainly from our interaction as CESA and through our European Federation with the Commission, the issues of this resource management, which is fundamental to all the different strands of work that are coming through.
Yes. Yeah, that sort of leads on really to another point: is that are there specific elements for us to focus on in this? I think we know the answer because it's a much more holistic approach. How would you view that, Andrew, as well? If you're looking with the consultancy side, what is there one particular area you would focus on over and above any other area within a venue? Or
I think it's energy consumption and the cost of energy is still the biggie, and we're having the electricity over gas debate, and I think because electricity can be produced in so many different ways now, it is very much becoming the energy source of choice. And we're seeing that more and more and more.
Yes.
And if we're talking to chefs, which we do, at that point, what's the chef want? They still like to see an open flame, but they are now understanding that they don't necessarily need to.
is there one thing, Peter, within your membership that you see as overriding any of the other elements that is of main concern to your 6,500 plus members?
I can't think of one thing. I know that both the energy costs are a massive impact for many businesses. The cost of waste is, and as Keith was saying, the cost of water these days. So water, waste, and energy are all important. But and I think particularly with as CRC, as the carbon reduction commitment comes in, and businesses are now paying £16 a tonne for their carbon, as well as everything else.
Yes.
It kind of focuses the mind quite considerably, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yes.
I think a key strand that comes through this, if I may, is that it's personal and business responsibility.
Yes.
It's such a broad subject, and I think there's a danger of sustainability being actually disconnected from local actions. And wherever anybody is, whether they may be operating that gas stove, whether it's a manufacturer producing product, it's making a change within the environment that you can directly influence that's fundamental, wherever you are in the supply chain. And I think that's what brings sustainability into the context of what goes on in our industry and what needs to change in our industry as well.
Yeah. So I think broadly there we've reached the conclusion that there's no one specific thing.
No.
It's a holistic approach, and the environment that we operate within is pushing everybody towards this for both pure business reasons and cost and profitability reasons, as well as you were saying, being good corporate citizens within what we're then doing, and thinking in the long term about our employment processes and our sourcing of produce. And as we know with Zero Waste in Scotland, for instance, the charging for removal of product in that way will come inevitably through the whole of the British Isles, and it will give us more cost bases to work from. But I think what it has done is really focus a mind of operators in a very different way, rather than just getting the job done. And speaking as an ex-coder here as well, getting the job done is first and foremost. What the bow wave is to that perhaps gets forgotten sometimes. So that creation, a much more focused and perhaps professional approach to it all is certainly what we're looking for, isn't it? So leading on to that, clearly the market's under a lot of pressure to change and reinvent itself. Do you think there's any standards we should be looking towards, or what sort of your members, Peter? Is there something that they can go to say what they should be doing, how they should be doing it?
Well, I think that's part of the problem. There isn't one go-to place, is there? No. There's lots of different places you can go for different bits of information, but there isn't a joined up solution that you can just open a box and it's all there. You know, that's part of the challenge still. But there are resources available. There's lots of resources available, and I think people are finding their way to them now.
Yes, I think we've established that people's knowledge is increasing, improving by the week, month, year, etc. Every 2 years we at GRAM create some individual research on the marketplace under the GRAM Green Paper to understand the behavioural patterns and behaviours and actions of end users in the marketplace, what they actually do to confront these issues. And where we're seeing it improving, people's lack of awareness on what support is out there, whether it's governmental loans or help or the Carbon Trust and the good works they do, it's drilling down through what is a very disparate and convoluted marketplace that's got many strands to it. But Keith, with your knowledge of the equipment part of the marketplace, what have you been seeing over the last couple of years in terms of standards and controls coming in that are driving change?
Well, I think there are two main pressures. One is the customer pressure, that demand for equipment that saves resource and cost. I think the other pressure is certainly the pressure that's coming from Europe in terms of the standards and the process that have been put in place as far as the environmental directives are concerned. End of life covered by the WE directive. That's the end of the life, the start of the life through the Ecodesign directive and energy labelling. So we're seeing a squeeze on manufacturers, which is actually promulgating innovation because it's satisfying both ends. And we'll see more of that undoubtedly. And I think the issue now is very much transferring those innovations and developments in a translatable form to the customer, so you can make a more informed and educated decision when specifying equipment. And that's a fundamental that will come from this driver. The more that awareness grows, I think the more it will filter through into the procurement process.
Yes, thank you. And Andrew, as a consultant, how would you go about trying to find this information?
Well, this is it. I was about to say, very much like Peter, there is such a wealth of information out there. And where do you actually go? And we're supposed to be the experts in everything, but you can't be because. So I think we do actually rely. If rely is the right word, we actually expect manufacturers to tell us, so that we can then compare, A against B in terms of its energy consumption and so on and so forth. And I think we do have to rely on the manufacturers for that technical information, but we have to have behind that we have to know things like but also because we get involved in the design process, BREEAM, all of those things we are supposed to have a good working knowledge of, so that we are indeed specifying equipment that will enable the project to have the right outcome.
Yes,
but I think this is one of the big sea changes there's been in recent years. That now all the way up and down the supply chain, people are talking about this and talking about how it's impacting on them.
Yes.
So there's a much more complete understanding of how it affects upstream from where you sit and downstream from where you sit, and it's more joined up. And I think and on that, more information is out there because of that.
On that joined up front, there was a report that was just published very recently, which links together all of the various standards issues internationally and the labelling issues, where this is going on in national markets, looking at that and seeing what it's actually done to reduce energy use. And it's been demonstrable that actually having these standards which are comparable across different equipments, and with labelling to go alongside to make that understanding clearer to the customer, it reduces energy use. And we know through the Commission's objectives and also the global objectives of reducing energy use, reducing greenhouse gases, these standards and labelling elements have a fundamental part to play. And we'll see it next year on refrigeration, of course. And close on the heels of that will be cooking equipment and dishwashing equipment.
Well, that neatly comes on to the whole section we would like to discuss as well, which is around the EU Design Directive and the application of energy labelling across the equipment. And as you were just discussing there, Keith, if you could just explain a little bit for our audience where we sit with that and what the main driver from Brussels is behind this, I'd be grateful if you could Try and encapsulate it as best as you can, because I know it's been...
I'll try and keep it short.
I know, yes, it's been a very long process.
And there are two parts to this, essentially. It's the Ecodesign directive, which is saying that after the 1st of July 2016, product that doesn't meet a minimum performance requirement cannot be placed on the European market. So what that will do...
That's in refrigeration.
That's in refrigeration, purely in refrigeration, yes. And that will take the most inefficient products out of the market in one instance. Coupled with that is the effect of the Energy Labelling Directive, which will be an energy label similar to what we see on domestic appliances, with the grading from green to red, the A to G scale, so that then you can start to make some value judgments over the price of the equipment and the life cycle cost. And we know from experience that 85% of the life cycle cost of a piece of equipment is through the in-use phase, the energy that it uses. With about 12% being the upfront capital cost and about 3% maintenance. So it's a fundamental part that needs addressing. And so that's essentially what will come in, and say 1st of July 2016 is the implementation date of that.
Yes, and we're looking forward to that.
Yes.
But this is a process, it is a very complex process it's gone through, and it's lot 1 of 23 lots that have been looked at to try and break down the commercial kitchen into its various constituent product parts. Refrigeration was chosen first because it already had an established and accepted test process, but this process commenced in August 2008, so it's taken some while to come to conclusion. I think the hope is that the next stage is how we can encapsulate those other areas of the kitchen purchase, so it's much more of interest to an operator to claim benefit across its whole kitchen rather than a partial part. And even in the most complex of site, probably no more than perhaps the 20 to 25% of the spend on the kitchen purchase to set it up would be refrigeration, depending on its configuration, but roughly that kind of level. But it could be using up to 30% of your energy. But of course, if you're only getting that benefit on that smaller part of your kitchen energy usage, it becomes less focus on it, and people are less inclined to try and go to the energy technology list and claim their enhanced capital allowance benefit, which is another sector altogether with that. So the drive is happening that way, isn't it, Keith, to help improve what we're doing across the whole of the commercial kitchen. And of course the difficulty is establishing a benchmark and a standard that is acceptable to the industry and to the marketplace, that will have a starting point that can then be improved upon to raise standards and improvement. And just one little thing, it's a statement rather than a question here, is our belief is that potentially up to 20% of the current supply of products into the UK and the European marketplace in refrigeration could be scraped away straight away, because it will not meet those new minimum energy performance standards. And you're looking at significant operating cost differences, up to several £100 per cabinet. And that, in a time when commercial imperatives are very, very strong, if you have 20 or 30 cabinets in a venue, that's a massive saving that could be made. But of course, you still need that capex somewhere to make that happen. So, what do you think, Andrew, is the knowledge of your consultant colleagues about these changes and what's happening from a Central European way?
Because consultants are out there in the marketplace talking to so many manufacturers and suppliers, they are very much aware that these changes are coming, and in a lot of ways it'll make their life easier. Because if you've got labelling, it immediately that starts to you can easily identify which are the most energy efficient pieces of equipment out there, and that certainly must make life easier for us. And I can certainly expect that some clients, especially those that are more even more switched on, will actually be saying to us, you must specify that is your minimum standard has got to be. And that will help greatly as well, because as you know, and I will just go slightly off topic a little bit about, well, not off topic, but where we have schemes where and people will certainly be aware of this, where you get pieces of equipment that have been specified, and then somebody comes along and wants to substitute. Substitutions, they must themselves meet those standards now, and I think that will help to reduce that.
That's the value engineering.
The value engineering, indeed.
And in fact, despecifying in that way is increasing the cost to the customer.
Yes.
What's the benefit?
Yes. Exactly.
Yes. So how do you think your members then, Peter, are confronting this? What sort of feedback do you get from your members about their knowledge and awareness of something like the design directive that we know a lot about now, but it's obviously incumbent upon us to actually inform and educate as well.
Well, I think a lot of the time they're getting advice from their consultants and their designers when they're doing the design process. But when you're replacing existing equipment, I think people are far more savvy now. And just as when you buy a car, you look at the energy consumption, which you maybe didn't back in the day, and you look at its its sustainable credentials. I think when you're buying equipment for a business, you do the same now. It's because it is hardwired into DNA for people.
I have to say, I think my personal viewpoint on it is that it starts to take away that decision-making process from, for want of a better expression, the salesman in a shiny suit telling what he thinks he wants to hear, and it puts it in a way that's much more easy to understand emotionally, and make your own judgment call, as you said, Keith, on if the labelling denotes a different value of kilowatt consumption per annum, well, you can make your own judgment on what your payback's going to be. Because if you were to ask anybody when you're selling equipment to them, how long do you think you're going to be in business? Nobody's going to say, well, I think I might last a year, therefore I'm not to get my payback. They're going to say, well, I'm going to be in business forever. So, it comes back to the incumbency on the supply chain, on the manufacturing side particularly, to be able to inform, educate and train its distribution chains, and also as well to make a product that's fit for purpose, not just for today but for in moving into the future, and be able to demonstrate very clearly what the total cost of ownership is, and making that distinction between cost of purchase and cost of ownership. And that's quite complex, quite difficult to do in what is yet again a very fragmented and disparate marketplace through all of its supply chains.
And we know, Glenn, when the Carbon Trust produced the cut cost and carbon calculator, it was evidence there that an uplift of 10% in the purchase price of the equipment by buying more efficient equipment was repaid within 18 months. And every piece of commercial kitchen equipment will last more than 18 months, as we know.
So I think it is the first domino that we're talking about here, and that general effect will holistically have a very significant change over time. But it's a question of when people need to replace and repair and what they're going to do.
But I think events like today's webinar, and the fact that they can attract an audience out of people's busy schedules tells you that it is on the agenda now, and it's great that this sort of event is happening. That is, increasing people's awareness, having the conversation,
and in various events that we've been at over the months and years, increasingly it is of the moment, and an operation, it's a sensible decision to make. You need to look very carefully what you're then doing, and it is darn difficult to be an operator out there. And we're talking about one element here because we haven't even discussed sourcing of food and sustainably, back to that word again, and what controls may be on that. The allergies people have to deal with now on their menus, and all these other things that are going into the pot to really make the operator almost struggle. However, it's what's needed and required in that. So it is a difficult one.
And I think that's the true that's for me what holistic truly means. It is all elements in the operation.
And competing manufacturers have worked collaboratively with the legislature to bring about a unified standard which everybody can work towards. So that's all been taken care of to make it easier for the operator, in fact, to make that value judgment at the point of purchase. And information and education are the two that run hand in hand with that, which hopefully make the operator's life a little easier. Recognising part of a system, as you said already, Glenn, but we'll see other work that will come and support.
And the market has matured, hasn't it? It is far more mature and far more sensible, far more common sense, I think, out there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But this is really focused at you, really, Keith, and specifically this next question is, what are the current advances happening in energy efficiency, and are we likely to see further big change in the next 5 years to 10 years? What sort of time frame do you think? Where do you think the tipping point will be in general terms for our consumers of product?
I think it will be continued evolution, Glenn. I think we know what the backdrop is of what we've got to do on a planetary basis. And the Commission's new remit is the circular economy. So nothing becomes waste, everything is a resource. And that is literally everything is a resource. So what we're going to see is more of the drive towards more influence, more legislative influence to making product conform. We'll also see that driver coming from the operator, the food service operator, who's putting that system together to make that kitchen function as efficiently as possible. We will see more of that. Certainly under Ecodesign, more product categories will come under scope. If we look at issues such as food waste, what goes to sewer, these issues, fats, oils and grease management, and indeed we've produce codes of practice on that. All of this comes into the picture. The value here is the innovation that will create from the manufacturers, who will rise to the challenge, invest the R&D, because recognising the future of manufacturing is addressing what the customer needs, and that's a vital and integrated platform on which to work.
It is very much a crass cliche, but I use it anyway. It's very important you make what people want to buy, not what you like making.
Yes.
And the next crass cliche here is every market gets the service support that it asks for and it deserves. And as you were saying, as the market's maturing and demanding more, then everybody has to look to their laurels and improve what they're then doing. And be much more forward thinking what they're doing rather than just today's sale.
Yes.
I think that's been a bit of a sea change in the last 5 to 10 years, and the people that have ridden the peaks and troughs of various economic conditions over the last 10 to 15 years, it has actually perhaps sorted a bit of wheat from chaff somewhere down the line, and perhaps like indicative across the whole marketplace, the skill gap we have in our section of UK PLC is quite difficult for us to fill, whether you're an operator or a consultant or a manufacturer or distributor, and trying to attract people into our industry, and we have to train, educate and reward and recognise people's skill and value in a much different way, and through the works of the CFSP, for instance, in establishing training modules for sales professionals in the UK, for instance, has been a great leap forward. That wouldn't have happened 15, 20 years ago at all. It just wouldn't have been on the remit at all.
And recognising the partnership that needs to happen, it's one thing having the most efficient product.
Yes.
If it's not used in the optimum manner, that can be wasted. And we recognise 30% of energy in a commercial kitchen is, quote, wasted through inappropriate use of the equipment. And so, yes, those trainings, CFSP does that. As Caesar, we've produced now over 10 years some carbon management podcasts just to help train kitchen staff to make better use of the products and use it in a more efficient manner. And I think we'll see more of that coming through. Also, as the availability of information becomes easier through various platforms, communicating that out is going to be critical. So the behavioural change matched with the equipment developments means that progress that we'll see over the next 5, 10 years will be evolutionary, but it will carry on, and different areas of the industry will be tapped into to deliver that.
And of course, we're talking from within the circle, as it were. Of course, the most important people in this whole process is those consumers, which we are in our personal lives, of course. And I'd be fascinated to know, Peter, as well, what sort of feedback you get from your members, from their consumers. What are they looking for when they're coming out to eat and drink and stay away from home? Are they looking for people with sustainability at the heart of what they then do? Are they looking for either sustainable produce or either the hotel or whichever is then working on a platform of its building and how it recycles water perhaps, and all those kind of things are out there?
Well, yeah, they are. And of course, it's not, consumers are not just people who go out to celebrate their wedding anniversary or a birthday. So much business, both in the food service industry and the hotel industry, is business that is won by tender and RFP. And every RFP, request for proposal, you get, there are reams of questions about all sorts of sustainability issues and about corporate citizenship, because people want to do business. Companies, big corporates particularly, have policies that say we will do business with organisations that do this, and we won't with people who don't do this. And so it's driven by the consumer. But I have to say, I think it's also driven by staff. And I think particularly, I hear more and more people saying these days that when they are recruiting particularly people from the millennials and Generation Y, at the interview, they will be checking on the company's
that's very interesting.
Environmental and sustainable credentials, because they want to work for companies that are doing the right thing by the planet, which is a very interesting driver. But I've heard that said to me enough now to believe it.
That's very interesting. We've been at events where Allegro is producing extremely interesting research on these topics. It's a very fast-moving, changing world.
It is.
Oh, yes.
As we get older, everybody gets younger.
Well,
we can't forget that, can we?
But this, the differentiation in the market, as you say, with the different customer groups, different age groups, is very, very important. And customers, the operators will often be driven or to try and differentiate themselves in the market by saying, look at our green credentials, look at this, look at that. And that is certainly a way that they will attract customers in.
So, Peter, what do you think if it could be accusations could be thrown at certain sectors, perhaps of the marketplace, people may be paying lip service to a lot of these issues. What do you think are the implications to those operators who don't perhaps take this as seriously as they should?
Well, I think there's fewer and fewer of them. I think, and Andrew was saying at the moment, Andrew used in the sort of opening remarks about greenwash, and I think greenwash has now gone because everybody can see straight through it. And I think if you put up a false image of doing things that you're not doing, you're on very thin ice. And I think most companies ethically wouldn't want. Well, I would hope wouldn't want to do that. Because if you trip up on it, it's you're into a Volkswagen situation.
Well, case in point.
Case in point.
And indeed, there's much more support around for operators to help them implement their sustainability programs. And saying that's throughout the whole of the organisation to get that ethos through a business. And we've seen some major retail players embark on this, and that helps everybody in whatever business they're in to see that it's part of an overall strategy of what business and what we as consumers all need to do to go back to that issue of addressing sustainability, which is a finite resource. How do we manage that resource most effectively?
And there are a good number of organisations out there. For example, you have RAP. Looking at waste management, you have Sustainable Restaurants Association. You do have Soil Association. You do have a good number of organisations out there who are there. I mean, yes, all right, they are promoting their own specific, but any operator who says I don't know what to do or where to go, come on, there is plenty of information out and help and assistance out there.
And the SRA is a prime example as well, isn't it? Something that wouldn't have been here 10 years ago. Less than 5 years ago.
Exactly.
And look how it's grown.
It's not kind of
whatever it is.
It's not just nuts and muesli. It is.
People are utterly focused on it as being a central plank of what they're doing as an operator within their business.
And I think while it matures, and it's important to talk to the manufacturer, because what we've also got is a complexity of the food service industry in the UK, probably the most complex globally because of the concentration of consumers in the market and the number of diversified means of delivering an out-of-home meal, that manufacturers understand the functionality of their equipment and what's best suited for particular applications. And no operator should be embarrassed about asking the manufacturer for what information they think they've got that will help them understand the role of that equipment within their operation.
But, there is quite a fundamental difference perhaps in our food service industry here and our high street here in the UK compared to continental Europe. We have a lack, if not a complete lack, of second, third, fourth generation restaurateurs and hoteliers, where people are making a lifestyle statement of what they buy and what they're doing and who they are and what they do. Whereas perhaps we have a much higher proportion of centralised purchasing, where a procurement team decides what 1,000 venues are going to have, whether the operator likes it or not. And I think there's a bit of a disconnect perhaps between the guys at the coalface who are behind the till and the stove and what is actually being driven through, and that is a difficulty I think to drive through, and depending on the kind of operation it is.
But Glenn, 'twas ever thus. There always has been that disconnect, hasn't there? But I do think a lot of staff now are far more aware of sustainability and if you like, green issues. I'm trying not to use that phrase, but I will say it. I think it is now very much part of our culture. It is. It's a cultural change.
Well, within half a generation, in reality, the way that we treat food and drink as entertainment outside the home and not fuel has changed enormously.
Oh yes.
And our children we discussed earlier, have an opportunity to eat and drink across however many types of cuisine from around the world. And their knowledge and interest in food is exponentially better. Perhaps it would have been back in the very much last century. So that whole arena we're operating is much more complex. And as you touched on, Peter, about the millennials and their approach to it, much more discerning, much more questioning about what they do and what they put into their bodies. And it's fascinating how that demographically has changed and developed in our lifetimes. And perhaps we'll only really fully understand when we look back in a period of time and say, did that really happen? That was just incredible. And of course the next stage is then that sophistication of that supply chain as it improves, as everybody else demands more. So we have to step up to the plate and provide the right products and supply them the right way and give the right advice to the right people. And that's a challenge, of course it is. But so, what do we actually think would actually be the real lead on sustainability? Is it legislation, the behavioural attitudes, or the innovation that drives it? What do you think, Andrew?
Legislation is always there, and I'll talk from an EU perspective. I think in the UK we do tend to follow it, and we know in other countries they tend to say, well, it's there, but I think yes, there are certain elements of legislation that we will have to conform to. And as you say, the supply chain, if you haven't got the labelling, if you're not there, you can't operate. Other elements probably are a bit more behavioural, those are the ones that only really come from training people. Yes. Those are from people rather than from legislators. Innovation, well, yes, everybody, all manufacturers are always trying to differentiate themselves in the marketplace. What's new? What can I do? What are the latest things that will get somebody to buy me? And if sustainability is underpinning the market at the moment, then I think that we will see a lot of benefits coming from new equipment, new energy efficient equipment that can deliver that.
What are your thoughts, Peter, on that? Do you think it's coming from within primarily?
I think it's coming from all sides. I think it's coming from legislation, certainly, but I think it's also coming from customer demand that I was talking about when people are tendering for business. I think it's coming from staff saying, I want to work for ethical businesses, as I was saying. And I think it's coming from the fact that in every organisation now there's better management information and people have more detailed analysis of, let's focus on it for a second, their energy costs, and saying, where is that energy going? What can I do to cut it? Because it's now all of a sudden one of my biggest variable overheads. What can I do about it? So I think the pressure's coming from all sides, and I don't know whether it's being driven by innovation from manufacturers or manufacturers are being driven to improve, and it's probably a bit of both, really, isn't it? It's a real push and pull situation, but either way, it ain't going to go away. No, that's for sure.
And how do you think that's impacted upon your consultant colleagues and members within the FCSI?
FCSI consultants are always out there, right in the thick of it. Drying up a little bit, but in terms of what? Sorry.
If they're having to react to these changes that are being driven by legislation, behavioural change in attitudes and innovation within there, that's clearly a difficult task for consultants to be on top of all of those elements, try and recognise them and then lead the way.
Well, yes, it is, but it is only by, as I say, by having the market awareness of knowing, getting into dialogue with manufacturers, with colleagues, with friends. It's only in that way can you really learn and keep up to date with what's out there.
And I think we have to be very careful that we don't fall into the trap of being on the receiving end of poor legislation, which is seen to achieve an objective. And we've seen that in some of the food waste issues where some parts of the country have dictated the way in which food waste must be managed, which in Scotland, in an urban area, is by curbside collection. Well, that removes the operator freedom to look at his own particular site, evaluate that and look at the most efficacious means of dealing with that food waste for his particular business. So that freedom's got to be there. Yes, the legislation should set out a framework, but it shouldn't be prescriptive that it prevents the freedom of the market to move in the way that it needs to. Coming back to that point I made earlier, accepting that responsibility is critical to this. It's making an informed judgment on what you may have done yesterday and making it a better place today through what you do. And that can be through behavioural change or specifying a different piece of equipment or a different solution. And that's going to change as businesses grow, change, customer bases change, and operators need that flexibility, and manufacturers will fill that gap if that need is there, as we said.
How well informed do you think the whole supply chain is about these legislative changes? So there's a question for you.
Well, we did the Mind the Gap research some 5 years ago, which was saying that manufacturers are producing state-of-the-art equipment, consultants may be specifying it, and actually the real pinch point was between the operator and the distributor. And that's with operators saying, I don't want to spend that amount of money on that kitchen. Downsize it to fit a bill. And I think the key element of work that we've got to put some push behind is holding that supply chain together. Certainly an energy efficiency index for a piece of equipment will help do that, because as we said, you can look at life cycle costs. I think with the advent of building information modelling and it's in its infancy in terms of knowledge, but it's growing very fast. That will allow that comparator to say, what if we take this product out and put that product in? What does that do to the overall energy bill? What does it do to the overall water use? And that's going to be a major and significant driver. So there's work going on around the scenes which will help consolidate all this knowledge and information and make it easier to access, I think.
But don't people more understand now that there's a big difference between price and value? Isn't that something that we see in our everyday lives, whether we're supermarketing it or whether we're buying for our business? You know.
Well, yes, I should say we hope so. One of the things again we were talking about earlier was how aware of energy, of how much energy they're using are operators. Separate metering. How many kitchens are separately metered? Certainly in new builds now. That's something that myself and my colleagues will always advocate, because unless you can measure it, you don't know.
And we know from Europe's energy roadmap that part of that strategy is a joined up approach to energy across Europe. It's about smart grids, the ability to move energy around, and it's about smart metering. And that's going to be a fundamental change, which when you start linking that together with the Internet of Things, which is the ability of everything to communicate with everything else, you start to get some gearing out of this that makes some significant changes in terms of the way we view information and data and how we can manage it as well.
Most certainly.
From the time not that long ago that when I would have seen a wind turbine. Now, of course, they are sprouting up, and they're just in the process of starting to build Europe's largest offshore field. Is Rampion field off the coast of Brighton on a bank there that will hold, and I can't remember the figure off the top of my head, but it will actually provide electricity for a significant amount of the county there to actually do it. Whether you may or may not agree with what they look like, they're going to be there and they're going to happen. And the UK has been designated as being, well, the British Isles have designated as being the main wind focus for energy production for Europe and the grid, as it were, that will be created. So it isn't going well.
No. You asked Keith earlier about innovation. One of the things I think that we will see is we will see a lot more of smart equipment that is self-diagnosing. Even at home yesterday, I had my domestic boiler had it serviced, and there, the chap said, "Do you know it's not burning efficiently?" Well, I don't know. He said, yes, because of the amount of CO2 that's coming off it. Well, if there was a little probe somewhere that was measuring that, it could tell me that it was going wrong. And I think we will see a lot more smart and intelligent piece of equipment, as you say, that communicate with each other. Bluetooth is everywhere. We will. But I think that is one of the things that we will be seeing as a no-cost add-on. It's a feature. It can talk to you.
And the dynamically efficient products is a buzzword that's going around at the moment. So a computer can be programming that equipment, and it could be a whole product range of a manufacturer's product, from the updating of a computer program that links in through a wireless connection to it that changes its performance. Much the same way as our set-top boxes update overnight. This is what's going to go on as we get this bigger interconnectivity.
And I think as well there's lots of innovation that has happened in other industries, in other sectors, that have now become affordable enough to be inserted into things as relatively affordable as a commercial fridge or freezer. And there's a lot of research going on at the moment, R&D side of things, in mainly more commercial, larger areas, but why not look at magnetism being a way of creating refrigeration? No refrigerants required, and all these things that can be done with it. The usage of smart packaging, for instance, on foodstuffs. That means that you could actually point your smartphone at a control on a fridge, and it tell you how much stock it's got in, what the value is, and when certain elements will be out of date.
Okay, sell by then.
And there is tomorrow's special. And trying to reduce the food wastage that's there, which we haven't really touched upon. It's pretty much a separate subject as well. But when you have up to 30% of food being wasted from farm to fork,
very much so,
and depending which research you take on board, between 1 and 5% of that can actually be down to incorrect temperature storage, not necessarily through the supply chain, but when it's actually in situ. And that also is, yet again, it's money down the drain again. So, Peter, with your members as well, are you seeing them creating much more creative ways of creating energy sources for themselves, or where they're able to do that?
We've got members all over the world, and certainly the members in the hotter parts of the world
Yes.
will routinely use solar.
Yes.
In the UK, no, I haven't come across it so much, I must say. But I think as a country we're going to have much more renewable energy.
We see like ground source heating.
Yes. Now,
those elements.
so I hadn't put that into it, but I know one hotel chain who do a lot of new builds. They use ground source heating as a matter of course, and they're saving 70% off a conventional hotel's energy costs.
And there are within internal both air conditioning refrigeration systems, it could be centralised.
Yep.
The heat transfer that goes on, they can be
Yep.
utilised.
Yeah.
The heat that's created in that process can be used to heat your water.
Yeah.
For the bath on floor
Sure.
3.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So
exactly.
there are ways to look at
There-
it, which the consultants
Yeah.
are very
Yeah.
able to then give that advice, and moving to CO2 a lot more into
Yes.
more holistic plans.
Yeah.
So there are elements that are happening there. But I'm actually delighted to say we have a question.
Oh, right.
Now, if
Good.
you just enable me to just read this from the screen here, and these guys would like to hear your response to this. So it's coming from the guys at Thai Fry Company Limited. They sell an oil filtration system that saves time, money and oil consumption and helps reduce the use of resources in the kitchen. But they find that a massive hurdle in this area is generally the nature and attitude of the people who make the decision. And the kitchen has a reluctance to try new technology, perhaps due to the related costs. So the question is, how would you propose to combat this attitude to try new technology that can help get a kitchen green?
Well, there's the disconnect, isn't it?
There's the
Disconnect between the
disconnect.
capital cost
There we
and
go.
the savings that can be
Yes.
made over a lifetime.
Yes.
And I guess that's about trying to
Yes.
embark on that journey and that message.
It is difficult, and it just in our personal experience, you can talk to as many people as you like, but it's whether they're listening or hearing.
Yes.
And trying to find different ways that just switch a little button in a different way that may actually help take that message forward. Pictures tell a lot more sometimes, and trying to just what do they say? The definition of madness is repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Just trying to just be a little bit more creative and understand what the needs are of those operators. Hey, it's tough, it really is, but there's a potentially very big both energy saving, cost saving, and of course how oil can be reused for lots of different ways as well.
And I think it's about collating all this information together, and this is one of the great values of industry exhibitions, and we've got Hotel Olympia coming up next year. A lot of the product in there that manufacturers will be focusing on, there'll be 70 odd CESA members exhibiting there, will be around addressing these sorts of issues of how to save cost, how to save energy, how to improve efficiency, how to make the kitchen work better as a system, all of that. And they've got industry exhibitions have a major role to play in communicating.
And of course, how you communicate and what platforms. There's so many different ways to talk to people now.
Yeah.
It is quite confusing, and some of these operators may be millennials who are going on Twitter feeds or asking their inverted commas friends that are doing the similar kind of jobs to them, what do they recommend, and all those different ways and platforms to actually help inform and educate. But of course, whose responsibility is it? The consumer to use sustainable businesses, or the business to be sustainable? Question mark. That's.
And I think as consultants, the FCSI consultants, my colleagues will tell you, one of the biggest problems quite often is actually getting the client to change.
Yes.
To say to the client, well, this is available. Oh, I'm not sure about that, or how much, and you get all. And it is very much an issue of overcoming objections a lot of the time, because people. We've all said everybody's well informed, but there is still an awful lot of misinformation or nil information out there.
I think half the difficulty is getting to the man.
Getting to the man,
money,
exactly.
authority and need
Yes.
to actually make the decision.
Yeah.
And how that information is disseminated around
Very much
the
so.
team they work with.
Yes.
And that, it stops in the drawer. It doesn't come out.
No.
And so it's how do they actually then share that knowledge?
Exactly.
I don't know if we've really answered those guys' question, because it is difficult, we know that.
Well.
But I think the people you're talking to are actually wanting more information, and if you can encapsulate the saving into pounds, shillings and pence and or time and or both, then it certainly does help.
And it's the constant promotion of ecologically sound equipment practices. If we are constantly leading and promoting that, it will become the norm.
Yes.
But my advice to them, back to the Tri-Fry guys, would be to say certainly the Hotel Olympia, I think, is that sort of place is an enormously important showcase. But what they really want to do is to identify or find out who are the thought leaders in business, and get them to be early adopters and use them as case studies to get to.
Yes.
There's nothing like hearing somebody you respect has used something successfully.
And as Keith was saying earlier, the use of small little videos
Yeah,
that don't necessarily have to have high
Yeah.
production values, but are showing what the reality is of what you have to do in A, B and C to get to Z to make it more efficient. And we do it for something as simple as changing the door seals and how you should wash them and clean them on a regular basis and put them back properly the right way so they fit properly. Very simple, but the churn you may have within venues and the training required, and then when we're training on complex pieces of equipment like blast chillers and freezers, unless you have a super user trainer, then you're in there every 2 or 3 months having to redo it all over again. So,
and we've got a great industry. We're so fortunate to be working within the food service industry, and talking specifically from equipment manufacturers' point of view. It's the integration of opportunities. So partner with fryer manufacturers, partner with the oil companies, and this may already be going on. It's look at what those other elements are involved in the whole process of what's going into the kitchen, because nobody's got unique ownership of all the information. And so it's adapting and adopting, I think, different models to bring about a solution.
Yes, quite. Thanks for the question. That's obviously sparked us off on all things, and perhaps we'll get there somewhere down the line, but hopefully that's helped a little bit. We know that legislation is pushing us in a certain way. We have something in the refrigeration industry called the F-gas regulations, which will be phasing out, inverted commas, old-fashioned and less sustainable and less energy-efficient refrigerants from the supply chain. As we're entering the last 10 minutes of our discussion, we can park that for a future date. But really what you need to know is the reputable branded suppliers and manufacturers are going to deal with that. That'll go away for you.
Exactly.
And alternative, they're not going to make it happen. And probably at no extra cost. So we'll absorb that and deal with it because we have to, and we're forward-thinking modern businesses in the main that have to do that. Those that are in control of what they're manufacturing and selling in Europe, I hasten to add. So, it is something we can then move forward. If I can just, with the panel itself, just focus on a few questions for you individually, if you don't mind. So, if I could start with you, Peter, please. You have plenty of experience of working in the hospitality industry. And what do you think is the biggest single challenge facing operators, and how, any advice you give to the people that are watching this now, how they can address this and avoid those challenges?
Well,
or mitigate them in some ways?
The biggest single challenge that's being talked about this month, and it's going to change, obviously, but it is preparing to accommodate the living wage. And I think that's a very interesting thing, because that really feeds into all sorts of things, because we see it happening at a time when our industry really is finding it harder and harder to recruit chefs. There's an enormous chef shortage in this country, as we know. Having to get their heads around the challenges of employing millennials, and who are different to previous generations. Their expectations are different. The way they relate to their employers is different. A lot of change going on there, and I think as an industry, our challenge is not to take the easy option and say, poor us. The living wage is a burden on our shoulders. It's going to mean redundancies. I think the creative solution is to say the living wage is going to make us have greater productivity, greater flexibility. We're going to have to upskill our workforce. We're going to have to look at every aspect. I was talking to a full-service mid-scale hotelier, so a guy with lots of hotels, and they were saying that the impact of it is going to be 5%. And they said, of course, what we don't want to do is either absorb that ourselves or pass it on to our clients. So we've got to find a way in the middle of being 5% more efficient, or as much of that 5% as we can. And it is by upskilling, it's by getting people to look at everything, and that will include things like energy, because it's a big cost. So I think the big challenge at the moment is changing your business model to accommodate the living wage, which makes everything just be a bit sharper.
And of course, perhaps the question hanging in the air is, why have we got the skill gap?
Well,
is it cause and effect, and where do we attract people coming into our industry? We covered this topic a little bit on our first webinar we did, and it was fascinating to hear the responses and those guys involved in that.
Well, I think as an industry, we still have a problem attracting talent. We're still not seen as the go-to place for a great career by too many people. But again, it's going back to the conversation we've been having today, and I think that, so I'll be brief, but I think that the more we can be seen to be cutting edge in terms of adapting to sustainability, being responsible, and all of those things, the more attractive we'll be as an industry to go to, because we'll be seen as a grown-up industry that is responsible.
And I don't think there has to be a way of us all capitalising on the fact that every form of media you either open, switch on, or listen to is basically selling with, for want of a better expression, food porn. It's there. It's in everybody's lives now. So people are seeing that, saying, "Oh, I'd quite like to do that." And if you're aware that Zach Baines is now putting his guys on 4 days working now. So they're not long days, but it's not for 7 or 6. So it's just trying to be a bit more creative in it and saying to people, this is an attractive industry you're going to learn from, an opportunity to travel, my boy, and see the world perhaps, and work in great venues and increase your skill set. So Andrew, just to you then, sir. When you advise your clients, what do you think is your most valuable piece of advice when it comes to being future ready out there in the market?
I think we have to, as consultants, people expect us to have the knowledge, to have the innovation. We can tell and we can give as much advice as we want, but if the client doesn't listen, doesn't take it, it's a waste of time. So it is about convincing clients of the benefits that are there with new innovation, new ways of doing things, and I think it's the new ways of doing things is the big thing. And certainly, if they're going to have, they say yes, we want to be green. They need to have some clear policies that are quite simple.
Yes.
But clear, with a few bullet points, but they are achievable, and then actually monitoring and managing their resources to ensure that is delivered.
Yes.
Because you can put, as Keith was saying earlier, you can put in as much equipment as you want, but if it can't switch on at 7 in the morning and turn off at 11 at night, what the hell? So it really is. It is stressing the importance of managing the resources well.
Yes, and I'm sure Keith and many of our peer group companies have lots of anecdotal stories of how people invested a lot of money on product and use about 10% of its capacity.
Yes,
and that comes back down to the supply chain again, which frankly is improving, has improved, and will continue improving because it'll be asked to. And if it doesn't react to that change in development, it isn't going to be around very long.
No.
So both individually and as companies have to take that responsibility, and through what we're attempting to do with CISA and other bodies in the marketplace to inform and educate and develop people's careers in a meaningful way in a fantastic part of UK PLC, as we said. It's a fabulous sector to work within. Just on to you as well then, Keith. Over the last 3 or 4 years and perhaps longer, sustainability has clearly been a big talking point for us. Do you think there's anything else on the horizon we should be concerned, worried about, or know about? Or do you think what we'll see is this continual improvement in the next 10 to 15 years, or without with the want of a crystal ball? But what do you think the next challenge is going to be for us all there?
I think that the break point has been probably over the last 2 or 3 years when we've realised that actually the future is not going to be the same as the past in terms of there being more available to us to use.
Yes.
We've recognised actually the resources are finite. We've got to work within those resources, and I think the critical factor is going to be a better sharing of information. If I look at the equipment sector specifically, it's adapting and adopting techniques, technologies, ideas from other markets and bringing those into what's relevant within the commercial kitchen. We know that the driver of what we all want as consumers in food service is going to change.
Yes.
It's changed significantly over the last 10, 20 years.
Yes.
It's going to change significantly. So we don't know what the future is going to be, but what we do have is a well-resourced manufacturing industry that's very in touch with the operator and able to respond to that need. And that's the critical factor. And I think as long as associations like CISA and our European colleagues can work to manage the legislative programme, to work with the programme, then we're ideally placed to work collaboratively together in all sectors of the supply chain, whether it be consultants, distributors, manufacturers, operators. We're all going towards the same goal, which is providing the customer with the food he wants to the quality he wants in the time frame that he wants. And so we've all got the same common goal there, I think.
So as we're rapidly losing time here, just one quick question to each of you. What is the biggest change you would like to see made in the industry going forward, Peter?
world peace and domination. No, I think it's ever better communication up and down the supply chain, because we have so much to learn from each other.
Yes. Andrew?
Goodness me, sort of being put on the spot.
We'll take world peace and
world peace and domination is taken, but it is to adopt what is there and to be flexible.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And Keith, have you anything you would like to summation?
Almost where I started, it's that responsibility.
Yes.
Let's make tomorrow different from today by doing something. And it doesn't matter where we are, whether we're a manufacturer or somebody within the kitchen doing what can be considered a menial job by some.
Yes.
We've all got a responsibility to do something different under that sustainability context. And training is undoubtedly part of that as a means of delivering that change and responsibility.
And I think undoubtedly we've established that the market is moving in the right direction. It's how quickly and which direction it actually takes as we move forward, but certainly isn't going to be how it is today tomorrow, is it?
No,
it isn't. And we will take it forward. And I think certainly the way that the cuisine in Britain is viewed now, and of course London, that happens to be an international city based in England, and it's the level of hospitality you have there, which is indicative around the rest of the country as well. Of course, the recently announced Michelin stars show that as well. So we have got a lot to be proud of here. It's making sure that drip down effect from the top speeds up a little bit, and if we can get a bit bottom up as well, then even better. But thank you ever so much for the input you've had there, gentlemen. It's been very luminous. I've certainly enjoyed it. I hope you have as well. And let's hope the guys and ladies watching this as well are going to take something from that. So thank you very much for doing it, and to our audience who have been watching this. By all means, please go to our website at www.gogreendebate.co.uk, and you can watch it all back in entirety if you wish, or fast forward to bits you may be interested in. And to finalise our whole session of webinars, on the 20th of October at the Charlotte Street Hotel, we'll have a Go Green Summit, where we'll involve the guys who've been involved in the various webinars, and some speakers telling us how they've actually achieved what we're looking to do in this area of sustainability, proper case studies given by operators of how they achieved what they wanted to set out to do. And we hope that will also be very beneficial to operators. That will also be filmed and can be viewed as well, so it'll be of great use to you. Thank you again for tuning in, and let's look forward to the next one we do. Thank you.
Okay.